Hey everybody, it's Rory from ANSgear. We're looking at a rebuild kit for a standard Empire regulator or PMI regulator. It should kind of work for that as well. But if you're picking up any of the Empire bottles that have this standard 4.5K regulator on it, this is the rebuild kit that you want to get for that. So inside this rebuild kit, you can have a couple O-rings, and we're going to pull this reg apart so you can kind of see where they go. And then some springs and some screws and some shims and some things like that. So if I spread this all out, so you can kind of get an idea of what kind of pieces we've got right here. You've got all your little shims. This is called a Belleville Washer right here. It is not flat. It is conical, convex or concave, I guess whichever way you want to look at it. And by stacking them together in opposite direction every time you stack them, you create a spring. And so this is the spring that will be inside here that does your regulation right there. So if you ever need to replace them or you take it apart and you lose them, you can use these replacements right here. Here's our pin valve. Underneath our pin valve is going to be our pin valve spring. These two screws right here that you see, they're the ones that are on the side of the regulator, which hold everything in place, or the bonnet in place. This larger O-ring is your tank O-ring that sits on the top right here. This is going to be our upper piston O-ring, our lower piston O-ring, and this is our one-way O-ring right here. So if you have a leak out the end of your one-way valve, you pull this off and you would replace the O-ring with this one underneath there. If you have a leak coming around the edge of it, then you would need to replace the Teflon that holds it together. So when this comes off, if you ever take the whole unit out, you need to replace that thread sealer when you put it back together, or it will just leak. So let's take this apart so you can kind of see what's inside there. So we're going to take this out. Now, for these screws, I'm using a metric Allen key. I believe this is a number 2. I don't know. Let me look inside here. 2.5 on this one that I'm pulling out. Now, a lot of people will take a standard Allen key and put it in there, not a metric size Allen key, and then they end up stripping these or rounding them out, and then it's really hard to get them out. So make sure you're using the correct Allen key size for those screws. Now, once we have the screws out, and this is not under pressure, obviously, if this is on a bottle, make sure that the bottle is degassed completely before you do any kind of regulator maintenance or service. I should be able to unscrew this and take this off. Now, as I take this off, I want to be very careful because sometimes there are shims that will stay inside here. They don't come out with the actual regulator piston. So I'm going to find, hopefully, my pick or a pick or anything. Wouldn't you know it? I don't have a pick laying around. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this piece of paper and we're going to do that. And I got them all out. So now I have these out. I'm going to take the rest of my piston out and just dump out my pieces right there. Now this is going to go on here. And I just want to make sure that, again, that everything is opposite all the way up right there. And now when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that this rebuild kit, I was wrong when I told you what this little O-ring was for right there. It's not for the one-way. It is for the seal on the top of the pin right there. So now that we got it open, I can see what that one's for. It looks like a one-way O-ring. Feels like a one-way O-ring, but I think since it's a reg rebuild kit and not a one-way rebuild kit, I'm pretty sure that's what they're using this one for. So here's our piston right here. And here's all our shims that are right on there. This one has some black and silver ones on there. You could replace them with silver ones. It's not a big deal. At the top of our piston, you see this O-ring right there. That's going to be that one. This one is going to be that one. This one right here would be our O-ring at the bottom of our piston right here. And then last but not least is this O-ring right here. If we look inside our bonnet, you can see at the very top up there, there's an O-ring that's sitting down in that groove, at the very bottom, I should say, but it's at the top inside there. When this pin comes up through and sticks out the top, that O-ring seals around this bevel, and that's what keeps the air from coming out the end right there when it's just sitting and not being pushed down, because there's air in that area when the pin isn't being pushed down. So when that pin pushes down, that air that's being trapped by the O-ring on this surface is allowed out. In this spring right there is this one and this one. So that spring sits inside this little pocket right there, and this sits on top of that. And the spring pushing the piston up, or the pin, I should say, up, is what causes it to seal against the top up here. Now, why would you need to rebuild this? Well, there's a couple things that happen with regulators quite often. Is the reg seat, which is this little puck that you see inside the piston right here. So it's at the bottom inside there. That seals against the floor of the reg body down in that hole at the bottom every single time you shoot. You shoot, the piston compresses or jumps, and then it reseals again on the bottom. If this fails, and it fails for all sorts of reasons, it could be dirt, it could be a little metal shaving, it could get a chip in it. As soon as this fails and it can't seal properly on the bottom of the regulator body, the pressure inside the regulator will build because it can't regulate, because it can't seal properly inside there. As soon as that starts to happen, your 1.8 burst disc will rupture and blow. And as soon as that happens, then you need to start rebuilding your parts. If your piston goes bad, you need to replace the entire piston. You cannot replace the little puck that's inside there. You need a whole new piston. If your O-rings fail, then this kit is going to solve your O-ring issues. And the majority of the reason that the O-ring fails, and I'm going to show you what happens. I'm not going to reassemble it completely yet, is the two screws that we took out that hold the bonnet in place right here and here, they're not tight. From just play or whatever happened, incorrect assembly, whatever it happens to be, they're not as tight as they should be. So when you screw this into your gun, it's fine because it's turning the bonnet in a way that tightens it against the body. But as soon as you're done for the day and you want to take your tank off and you start unscrewing it the other way, what happens is the body starts to separate from the bonnet. As that happens, you'll get to a point where this O-ring up inside here, I'm going to pull this piece out again. This O-ring along the top right here gets to a point where it no longer is sealing inside the bonnet. It moves out of the area where it can seal, and the air pressure forces it to pop out, pinch, and cut. And it ruptures the piston O-ring in there, and then the regulator fails. So it's probably, out of 10 reg issues I see with this one, 9 of them are because of that issue right there. So this is going to solve that issue. You're going to replace that upper piston O-ring. You'll replace the lower piston O-ring if you need it. You'll replace this one in here, but this one only you'll replace, the one that's up inside the bonnet right here, if when everything's together and it's under pressure, if you have a leak coming out the top, then you would replace that one right there. That's it. Just make sure that your screws are tight on there, and that will solve a lot of issues so that your bonnet doesn't unthread when you're trying to take your tank off your gun. It's quite a common issue. And it's more of a common issue on this particular regulator than on other regulators. For some reason, don't know why, it just is. So we're going to make sure that that's all the way down. We're going to take our 2 screws using the correct size Allen key. Because when it comes down to tightening these, if we're using an Allen key that is loose or sloppy in there, and we try to tighten it, then it's going to jump and it's going to strip, and then you're going to have a problem. So there you go. We got the O-rings to rebuild it. We have a spring. We have a pin. We have some extra screws, and we have the shims. Comes in the rebuild kit right here. So if you've got one of these regs and you have a leaking issue that can be solved by this, pick one of them up. It's really easy to do. Get yours today at ANSgear.com.